Today is actually a very important webinar. It's about networking, and it's something that a lot of people don't traditionally think about in this day and age in terms of a really good way to get a job. They think in terms of applying places online and other sorts of ways that certainly have always been, almost as long as I've been working, have been good ways to get jobs. But at the same time, I think networking really makes a big difference. It makes a big difference. Most of the most successful attorneys are networked. And that's one of the reasons why this is such an important presentation. So I'll give the presentation, and then after today's presentation, we'll take a quick break, and then I will come back and we'll do questions, which is my favorite part of the week. So you guys will be able to pretty much ask about this or any other questions that you may have about anything. So most successful attorneys are quite networked, and a lot of attorneys, unfortunately, don't network. And network means that they have a large circle of people, that they give them information that they otherwise might not have, and they're also able to make themselves known to a large pool of people that they might not otherwise know. And when you know about jobs, developments within your firm, things going on in the legal market, ways that other people are getting business and making money, all these things can be very helpful to your success as an attorney. And in fact, I would argue that honestly, the most successful attorneys out there are, whether it's about getting business or whatever, they really are networked quite well. And being known to sources of information relevant to your career is even more important. Today, I'm going to talk about networking and your legal career. I'm going to discuss the value of networking to finding a job inside of a firm. And then I'm also going to discuss its value to keeping a job, and then why people that don't network often have quite a few problems in their career. Honestly, when it comes right down to it, if you're quite networked, you often don't need to look for a job. Jobs will come to you, and you'll constantly be, all sorts of opportunities will be presenting themselves that you normally wouldn't become aware of. So the first part I'm going to talk about today is the importance of networking and finding a job inside of a law firm. And honestly, when you look at all the studies, most people learn about jobs through people that aren't their close friends. So most studies have shown, and there's lots of studies, that other people find out about jobs through other people. So in the late 1960s, there was a graduate student at Harvard, and he did a study about how most people find jobs. And he subsequently published a book on this and other findings in the mid-90s. And this book offers a lot of findings about how people learn about their jobs. And what he did is he interviewed a lot of people and asked them to identify the 5 people they spent the most time with, and then draw a diagram as to how those people were connected to each other. And at the time, it was pretty well known that most people were learning about different jobs through other people and not advertising. And so he asked the people that he interviewed to identify the person who referred to their last job. And what was interesting was that the person that he identified was never one of the 5 close friends. And when he asked them who the person was, people almost responded that the person was an acquaintance and not a friend. And so he interviewed 282 technical, managerial, and professional workers, and he found that of the 56% of people who found their jobs through personal contacts, only 17% learned about their positions through close friends. So the lesson behind this seems to be that most people actually do learn about jobs through people who are outside their networks. The people whom you're closest to tend to have access to the same information you do, but people outside of your group are likely to be exposed to information that you're not exposed to. And so if you want to learn about a job, it's often important that you have access to people that are outside of your existing network of close friends. And there's really no reason to suspect that this logic wouldn't also apply to attorneys. And in my experience, this is actually even more appropriate, because I think about less than 5% of all attorneys get positions through people that are in their immediate circle of influence. I've certainly heard of it happening, but most people find it through other people that they're immediately connected to. And one of the interesting things I remember that when I was a young attorney and practicing law was an individual who's considered one of the most successful attorneys in the country said to a group of other first-year associates of myself that one of his biggest mistakes was not making more friends and getting closer with people when he was in law school. And at the time, I remember being amazed by this statement, because I saw this person as someone that was, remarkable. He was very successful, and I had a hard time believing an attorney could be much more successful than he was. But what I did not understand was that he believed that if he properly networked, even at that early stage, he could have been much more successful than he was at that point. So regardless of how well you network in law school, when you commence the practice of law and throughout your entire career, being able to network is something that is going to be very important to your current job search and your present job, your future job search. Because if you're able to network beyond your immediate social ties, like people that you know closely, then it's going to be very helpful for you when you're seeking a position. And large law firms tend to emphasize things like your billable hours, how meticulous you should be, and the stress and demands of the practice of law will often undermine the importance of networking, because the law firms don't necessarily reward you for networking. They reward you for hours and the quality of your work many times, but in terms of direct rewards. But many attorneys think that a lot of times once they've joined a large law firm, that all they have to do really is do the best work they can and nothing more, and they're going to do well. But this is just not true. And I think that most attorneys that join law firms when they're out of school won't really stay there longer than a couple of years. And most of them join another large law firm as well. And the odds are pretty good in most cases that they're also going to be at the same law firm for a short period of time as well, for a couple of years. So if a young attorney goes to a large law firm and closes the door, puts on blinders, and they work as hard as they can, they're making a mistake. They're not networking as well. There's a fallacy in thinking that if you just work as hard as you can, then you're certainly going to have long-term success. And that's not the truth. The success of most partners and other individuals is really, in most cases, more due to networking than the quality of their work in many cases. And networking is what gets you work. So the work you get inside of a law firm typically comes from networking, and work almost always comes from partners who've managed to make contacts outside the firm, which come from networking. And these partners often have gotten involved in the community and met people outside their immediate group of people, and that have given them business to spread the word about the attorney and their good work. And that's networking. And so the idea is being able to get a position through networking in a legal job is very subtle, because you typically need to have a large group of people with whom you associate both inside and outside of your law firm. And I think you're much more likely to get a position from someone outside of your immediate group of attorneys that you may be associating with than people that are necessarily your close friends. And if you know a few people and you stay close to them, you're likely to only benefit from, again, the information that they have. And you'll always already know what that information is. But the thing is that when you're exposed to lots of acquaintances and other people, you're going to learn a lot more information. And the number could be 10 to 20 times as much information. It's a lot. And I go out of my way to try to interact with groups and different people because I want to be exposed to different types of information about how to do my job or to think about the world. And really, when you are exposed to lots of different people, it can help you quite a bit. And, as a recruiter, I spend a lot of my day talking to people about job openings. And when I recruit, I've often noticed that the best attorneys are people who are the most open to speaking with me. In fact, when I first started this several years ago, I was very surprised. Even as a young recruiter, I would call partners, very successful partners, and they would be very chatty. But when I would call attorneys that weren't as chatty, they would hang up on me and be mean. These tended to be people that weren't as successful. And the most successful attorneys are typically actually very nice to recruiters and anybody that's providing them information. And an interesting thing too is there's lots of sources of leads that recruiters use. There's things like the top 40 lawyers under 40 in California, or America's top trial lawyers. And if you call people from these lists or interact with them, they're almost always happy with their current positions and unlikely to move. But they're almost always as well very open to speaking. They're not guarded. They're interested in any information they can get. And they're just very nice people. And they often ask to send you your card, to connect with them. And they always take the time to speak. They return calls. And these are the attorneys that are supposedly like the most in demand. And so why is it that the best attorneys are the nicest and the easiest to get through to when the others aren't? And so I think it's the reason that a lot of these attorneys are getting on these lists and considered such good attorneys is because they're very good at networking in the first place. However they do it, they're often able to get the attention of people in the media and other attorneys and at other firms, and because members of the public are nominating for these lists. And the ability of these attorneys to get media acknowledgement is meaningful, but many of them are getting this acknowledgement because they're so networked and they're talking to people and they're out there. And I was always intrigued because I know whenever I read this list, I know that there's attorneys out there that are often far better attorneys who don't make these lists. But those attorneys, in terms of their technical proficiency, but those attorneys are often not as networked. They don't have people speaking up for them and saying nice things. And in a lot of my conversations with attorneys that make these lists, I think that one of the reasons they take my phone calls and speak with me is because they highly value any type of network or connection they can get. And a telephone call with me would be often very annoying to a less savvy attorney, but by networkers, it's typically going to be something that's very important to them because they're going to learn. And I think they value anytime someone can provide them any form of information that they may not be exposed to in their day-to-day practice and life, they're very likely to be interested in it. So when you look at how most individuals learn about jobs, in my opinion, they're often learning about them through networks that are really outside their immediate spheres of influence. So the question is that I would be asking if I was you watching this is, how do you network to find a position? And I've listed some of the ways that I believe are really good to do it. I'd like to mention that I've known a lot of people that have done nothing but networking and not been able to find a job. But often, the answer to people that don't get jobs through networking is pretty basic. It's often that they just don't want a job. And many times these attorneys are very easy to spot because they lack the enthusiasm, engagement, and interest of someone who's going after something that they want. If you're not really interested and you don't really want something, then you probably aren't going to come across as really wanting it and really pushing your different connections with people and trying to do whatever you can to make sure you get a certain job or not. And that's important. So the better you network, the better off you're going to be. So just going to events is not going to help you if you don't really want a job. And if you really want a job, you're going to have almost like a major enthusiasm that's going to come through that you're networking, and people are going to want to, hire you. You're going to be excited. You're going to ask questions to get to the next step. So the first thing you need to understand, though, is that how you network with everyone really counts. And this is one of the most important things. So how you act among friends, what you say, what you don't say, all that stuff matters. And the thing is that you have to remember that everything you say and do counts. So if you're going to network into a job, you need to be the kind of person that is referable and that it comes across as someone that you would want to refer. You would want to refer someone that liked their job. You would want to refer someone that didn't talk negatively about everyone. You would want to refer someone that worked hard and didn't cut corners. So if you think about all those things, if you can develop a good reputation for yourself and you're helping other people and you're seen as a force for good and you're honest and you volunteer and to attend things that don't seem important, all these things count. And people need to see you as the sort of person that they would want to refer, that they would want being their attorney if they had an issue, or they would want working in their firm if they had a firm. And so everything that you've ever done is probably known by someone. Every time you've done something good, every time you've done something bad, and it's known. And you want most of that conversation and that stuff to be positive. And if you become a topic of conversation, or if someone is interested in passing along your name, then there's definitely going to be a good general opinion expressed about you. And you want that opinion to be positive, and you want people to think that you're the sort of person that can be recommended. So just remember, when you're working on anything or any firm you're working at, you want to always leave people with a very positive taste in their mouth. Even if that you don't get along there or things aren't going well, ultimately you want their memories of you to be positive. And then I emphasize this to a lot of people, and it's not something that people always agree to, But I do think it's very important to make yourself known to lots of different people. And one of the reasons that companies and people hire advertising agencies and public relations firms and all those sorts of companies is they want to make themselves known, and they want to be large audience of people to know who they are and be able to get the attention of people. And attorneys use recruiters because recruiters have the ability to make under large groups of people if they know what they're doing, and the right people, and get their attention. And a product will often not sell unless a large group of people knows about it. And that's just how it works. And if you think a little bit about this, if people don't know who you are and they're not talking about you, or they're not seeing you, how can you possibly get a job? The only way to get a job is to be seen. And so good recruiters will get you seen and are very good at that. Networks can also help you. The larger your network many times and the more indirect contacts, the better. In smaller cities, recruiters are often not used. In certain practice areas, they're not in smaller cities as well because everyone knows each other. But in large cities, there's many practice groups that are very networked, and everyone. Bankruptcy is an example where the attorneys in some markets are very well networked. So having a network and people saying positive things about you is very important. And bankruptcy attorneys in Silicon Valley is a perfect example. There's never a ton of them. And so they tend to know each other very well, and they share opportunities about the work coming in and different opportunities. And I've seen in different downturns, there's been several since 2000, bankruptcy attorneys all kind of banding together and protecting each other when there's a lot of work, because they know about all the opportunities, and they move and really rarely use recruiters because they're very networked and they share information with each other. And if there's work at their firm, different people will talk to each other about different opportunities and so forth. So there's a very good network of bankruptcy attorneys, and it's like that in many parts of the country. But when there's a good network, it's very easy for you to get a job, and you hear about jobs and things through your network, and that's very helpful. Every time I've tried to recruit bankruptcy attorneys in Silicon Valley, for example, and even LA to a lesser extent, though, they're just very connected, and they know each other, and they know opportunities, they know what's going on in large firms and small firms, and that can be very helpful to them when they're looking for different opportunities. They're just networks, and there's information there's informal information, then formal information, and so that information is very useful for them to find different positions. Let me just see here, one more thing I wanted to cover with you. But so most large cities, it's not like bankruptcy. There's a lot of individual networks of people. Sometimes there's not a lot of crossover in those networks. It can be very difficult for attorneys to develop networks of any substance in those markets. Often there's not a lot of attorneys that really realize the importance of all this network. And then there's often a lot of outside organizations and things for them to get involved in. And so there's so much going on many times that it's difficult for you to even imagine. There's endless supplies of groups and things. In LA, there's so many legal groups. There's things that meet almost every day. And I used to wonder a long time ago why attorneys and so forth could possibly have so much interest in all these groups. And I thought you'd almost be better off if you're interested in a certain information about a practice area. You'd almost be better off just picking up the treatise and reading about it, or going to an event. Because you probably get better information. But when you go to meetings and conferences, and it's different. Even if you have to drive there and pay for parking and sit around in an auditorium, this is exactly the point, because you're taking time to meet people, you're listening to people outside of your major circles. You can't just turn off a Zoom and leave. You're meeting people and you're learning things, and you're connecting and putting a face to names, and you may develop the opportunity to ask questions personally in an informal way and get information you might not normally get. And the more you go to these meetings, oftentimes the more familiar people are going to become with you, and the more familiar you're going to be with them. And these networking events, I'm telling you, this is where a lot of the information comes, because you can get jobs for them, you can get client referrals for them, just all sorts of things happen. And when a lot of people know you, when things come up, if someone's looking for someone like our attorney referral, or they're trying to hire someone, then they'll often mention you, and that can be very helpful. And they may mention your name to companies that need help with something if they don't do that type of work. You'll have the opportunity many times to do favors. Sometimes you'll be asked to just do some secretarial type work, meaning, I don't know, keep minutes or something in one of these groups, or to pick something up for them, or to make a connection. And these favors and the fact that they exist is a positive thing, because over time they can lead to reciprocity in terms of other people wanting to do favors for you and so forth. And when you go to all these networking events and keep in touch with people, this ultimately really increases your networking possibilities, because you just learn things. And if you take an interest in certain causes, or you sit on boards unrelated to law, or you write books and papers, this too increases things when people want to talk to you. And so everything you do really involves interacting with other people, and ultimately will increase your networking possibilities. And one of the largest functions of my job really is making networking happen for attorneys that are looking for jobs. And there's lots of ways you can network when you're looking for a job. And there's a few things that I work really well. And most people don't have huge networks, and it's not their fault, especially for attorneys, because of the way the legal market works. So a lot of them, the recruiters in particular, their job is to really help people network. And when times are good, many people don't think very highly of recruiters, because they think that all they're doing is making a simple introduction. But many times it ignores the reality of the situation, because the reason that most legal recruiting firms and recruiters aren't that successful and they're not effective because they're not really good networkers. They don't know how to bring people together. And so many recruiters just don't know they're not experts in networking other candidates into jobs, or networking candidates to work with them. There's just a lot of networking that doesn't happen quite well. But about 3 years ago, I heard a story that seemed, at the time to me very strange. But after I heard it, it became more meaningful. And I met this person in Beverly Hills through my wife. And the person had come to the United States from a foreign country, and not too long ago. They'd literally come over. They didn't speak much English, and opened a pawn shop. And the business of this pawn shop was loaning out money to movie stars and other people when they had financial problems. And they would typically borrow money from things like rare art, expensive cars, jewelry, and he would loan them pennies on the dollar in exchange for the title to the goods, and hopefully the person wouldn't pay it back, and then he would keep it and sell it. But people were charged interest, and then it was a pawnbroker. So if they didn't pick up the goods in a certain period of time, he'd take possession of them. And he became extremely successful doing this. And he lived in a nice house in Malibu and was having a playboy lifestyle. I don't think he's ever gotten married. But I asked a couple people about him, how he became so successful, because I just didn't understand how could owning a pawn shop someone be so successful, because it's a very competitive business. Anybody can open a pawn shop. And he certainly had an interesting business model, but there was also a little bit more to it. And when he came over to the United States, he came over without significant money. And when he came over, just one second. I thought that was something about this webinar someone called. Anyway, he'd come over and he hadn't had a lot of income. And he'd opened this small pawn shop, just trading in little things. And the first thing he did was he started asking who was the best public relations person in Los Angeles. And apparently he asked around for months, and he was reportedly told of someone that was so good that her reputation was far better than everyone else. And he called the public relations person's firm, and he was rudely told by a receptionist that the person didn't take any new clients unless the public relations person approached them first. But the man kept calling and for months, and eventually he was put through, and the public relations person listened as the man talked about how much he wanted her to work for him and how he'd heard so many great things about her and all this thing. And after a couple of minutes, the public relations person asked what he did, and he told her he ran a pawn shop. And she quickly got off the phone and said she had no interest in doing public relations. He also told her that he couldn't afford her because she charged a minimum retainer of, this is a long time ago, of a couple $100,000 for her work. So the next morning he went to the public relations firm and told the receptionist he wanted to see her. The receptionist made a phone call and told the man, was told he wouldn't see him. So then he told he would wait, and he waited. And over the next few weeks, the man came by the public relations and sat in the waiting room every day until the firm closed each night. Each day was rebuffed and said he would wait. And after 2 weeks of this, the receptionist finally looked up and said, "Okay, she'll see you now." And he met with her, got on his knees and begged her. And he was a former commando. I guess he'd been in in this country, the special forces, whatever the equivalent is there. And she finally agreed to represent him. And what he understood, and what many candidates of most legal recruiting firms don't, is that there are certain people who, by virtue of their position in society, are very well placed in networks and can influence public opinion. And I could write about the legal recruiting profession forever because I love it. But when it comes right down to it, a good recruiter can influence the course of your career because they're good recruiters are well networked. And good recruiters are well networked because they're constantly speaking to law firms about what the law firms need all day, every day. And they're well networked because of their relationship with law firms, they have a dynamic where certain firms are likely to listen to them when the recruiter's serious. And they're a voice inside the legal profession and someone who has direct contact with hiring partners and other legal personnel inside of law firms. And this isn't much different than what a good public relations can do for a company or individual. They're just people who, by their nature in society, can make your case heard. And that's what a good PR person does. And I've worked with lots of candidates before I represented them, didn't get a single interview. And once I was involved, some of them had job offers within a day or two, often at the same firms that may not have worked with them initially. All I'm saying is there's certain things a good recruiter can do that can be just as profound as what a good public relations can do, and this person was able to do for the shop owner that he couldn't do himself. And because of what a good recruiter can do, it really shouldn't be surprised that they don't represent everyone in their search. Obviously, good recruiters have just a public relations person certain standards. Otherwise, they're going to lose credibility. And best recruiting firms will typically have the highest standards for their candidates. And a good recruiter also spends a lot of time and effort on each candidate's behalf and can only work with a few people at a time. And good recruiters must also believe in the person, like the public relations person wanted to believe in him before she represented the pawn shop owner. Because if they believe in the candidate and the person's reasons for getting a job, they're going to be more successful. And if a candidate doesn't really want a job and they're going to be unsuccessful, then the recruiter isn't going to really want to help them either. But if I have a candidate that really wants a job, then I typically would do everything within my power to get that person a job. Whereas if someone doesn't, you're not going to be as aggressive. A lot of recruiters, just like a lot of public relations people, a lot of attorneys and so forth, aren't that good at what they do. In the legal recruiting world, a lot of people aren't good at it because they're not that networked, or they don't nurture individual networks. And when you're using someone to network on your behalf, you really need to be in a position that is well placed and someone that knows what they're doing. That's very important. Given that recruiters charge employers fees, the firms they deal with are likely to be the best firms, the candidates, but that's not always the case by any stretch of the imagination. It used to be, but it's not really anymore. Pretty much all firms, in my opinion, almost all of them now use recruiters, but a lot of candidates they deal with are going to be people coming from the best firms or attorneys, unless they're firms with narrow skills or really good qualifications. And so what happens is the involvement of a recruiter with these attorneys is a value added. And most firms, the best firms, expect you're one of those attorneys when you come through them. And at times with the very best firms, they're often suspicious of a candidate's coming through them without a recruiter because they may think there's something wrong with them for not using a recruiter. So it'd be like almost imagine if a famous movie star approached a studio and tried to negotiate a picture without an agent. They would think it was strange and they would wonder what was going on. So that's the same thing that happens with the best attorneys approaching big law firms. If you typically, again, they expect that they're going to be using a recruiter in most cases. So and again, if Brad Pitt approached a small studio without an agent, the studio might be delighted and try to sign him up at low rates. And it's the same thing even with if you try to approach a small firm, many times without a recruiter, they may try to get a better deal for you than they would normally pay. I would say probably 90% of attorneys don't really have the credentials to deal with most recruiting firms, but just as the majority of actors and actresses don't really have the credentials to deal with a top agent. And the majority of people in the market probably shouldn't be dealing with agents, but There's nothing, but that's just most markets. And the recruiting market's a little bit different, I think, in the legal placement market that I'm in. I think that most firms, if you have experience in a certain practice area and you know what you're doing, and you're good at your job and committed, then they are happy to use recruiters. But in most cases, a lot of people don't fit that bill. And often that's very difficult for a lot of people, but it can be hard to build up a network in most major cities if you're an attorney. So recruiters can help you do this many times. And I think that one of the reasons for using recruiters is just because the attorney and the recruiter can really help you network. But if you're looking for a job without a recruiter, one of the ways that I recommend is you really need to create your own network very quickly. And one of the ways you can do that is that I recommend is just apply to all the firms in a given market that match your interests. So if you want to do employee benefits in a certain market, look up all the firms that do that and apply to all the people that do that in the market. And that can actually be a very effective method, and it can work very well. And Law Crossing is a company that I run. It typically has over 150,000 jobs on its site, not 50,000. But this company monitors the needs of every law firm and corporation in the country, and it can be very effective. The point is that you really need to do whatever you can to network, and anything you can do to network and develop a strong network is going to be very helpful for you in your career, in your job search. Now, the next part of this presentation, I think, is probably even more important to some extent, and this is about the importance of networking to keeping a job inside of a law firm. And in most law firms, unless you understand networking, it's very hard to keep your position for an extended period of time. You need to have a very strong network within your organization in most cases to survive. And I can remember when I was employed inside law firms, one thing that became clear to me is most people that end up losing their jobs inside of law firms are not fired because their performance is poor. They're let go because people don't like them. So, when they're fired, it could be that one person doesn't like them, or it could be several people don't like them. So let's just think about this for a second. If you think that one person not liking you inside a law firm isn't a big deal, you probably think you don't have much of a problem. And there's very few people inside of any law firm, of more than, I would say, 10 people, that don't have anybody that where everyone likes them. It's just how things work. There's a saying that goes 30% of the people will love you, 30% of the people will hate you, and 30% of the people won't care. And so and now hates, maybe, I would say 30% will like you, 30% won't care, 30% won't like you. So it's just the rule of thirds. But if one person doesn't like you, that's high up in the firm, you're certainly going to be on the defensive. One person usually can't bring you down for reasons that aren't substantive, but they can certainly hurt you. So if one person doesn't like you, they're typically going to look for small ways to slight you, both in your presence and outside your presence. They may attempt to get other attorneys inside the firm to dislike you. They may do things like talk behind your back, start rumors, speak negatively about you to other attorneys. And the only way you're going to become aware of that and really be able to defend yourself against that is if you have a strong network and you have people out there that are making you aware of this, and also that will defend you. I hear a lot of times when people say things like, I'm going to keep my head down when they're placed and just do my work and go home at the end of the day. I'm not going to get involved in the politics like I did at the place I was before. And when I used to hear this sort of statement, my thought was always that the person was being smart. And I think there's a lot to be said about being networked inside of a law firm, but if you're not networked, you're not going to have a high risk of upsetting people, but at the same time, it's not always the best thing. You don't want to go too far with your networking and get too entangled in it, but at the same time, you need to be careful. Common mistakes that people make are they sleep with people in the office is one that some places that's not going to hurt you, but it's generally not a good idea. If you say stupid things about your boss, you backstep other attorneys when you're out after work and so forth, or at the office, that's not good. And it's really good to avoid that kind of stuff and maintain a distance. And if you can, that's good. And a network does things like tells you who to avoid, which partners to avoid. It can tell you who has the most power, even when it's not evident. It can tell you who's on the way out. It can tell you who has a lot of work and can give you work, who may be doing things right. And all these things are useful and can help you in growing. And access to this information really can help you survive. And so without this, you're going to be penalized. And so you need that information in order to do well. You need to have access to those tidbits of information because that can show you how to act and what to do. And it's very useful. So if you're unnetworked, then you could end up having very significant long-term problems in your career. And it's just something to really think about. So I think an entire treatise honestly could be written about the value of networking. And I would like to, talk a little bit about how, how if you don't network, it can really hurt your legal career, even kill it, prevent it from taking off. And I think that the inability to do this is often one of the strongest things that hurts legal careers the most. So when I was in college, I was a great student. I don't know what happened. Certainly didn't last in law school. But I was one of 10 really good students in my class that were nominated for like Rhodes Scholarships and all these different types of things. And the school had some meetings where they got everyone together to talk about things. And none of us got these scholarships, or at least none that year, but they got the Fulbrights and stuff. But so the ones of us that didn't, most of us applied to law school. And I remember one of these students being very close with one of our professors and thinking that she was a brown noser, and I didn't understand why she would spend so much time talking to this particular professor. And he was actually a professor in the law school at the University of Chicago, and he was quite well known in the academic community. And at some point in their professional relationship, she told him what her first choice school was for law school. And she told him this one evening, we're at some event discussing where everyone was applying to law school. And a couple of days before law school applications were due, she sent hers in. And within 5 days of sending her application across the country, she received an acceptance letter back from the law school in the mail. So she sent her application. They literally probably had it one day, and they sent her an acceptance back almost the same day. And most people had to wait for months. And the idea to me was she was a good student and had great test scores and stuff. But I don't think that the number one law school in the country is just accepting people that quickly. There must have been something going on in the background to make that happen. And I'm pretty sure it had to do with the professor in the other law school that she was close with. And then when I was in my second year of law school, I was sitting outside the office of a fairly famous professor that became the dean, actually, of another big law school. And I was waiting to speak with him about a paper. And I noticed he'd spent a lot of time with chatting with other students and another student in the hall. I think she was his like TA or something like that. And they were always debating about one topic or another. And so again, she was someone that I pegged as a brown noser. And I was thinking that she was wasting her time talking to this professor about this intellectual stuff, and she was smart. Maybe she'd spend more time studying. I don't know. So I was thinking kind of negative thoughts, and I had some mutual acquaintances of her, and I knew that she was an average but not stellar student. But then I heard something that day that was quite astonishing to me, and something I'll never forget. The professor said something when I was, on the phone, something like this. He said something like, "Her grades are fine. She'll work hard. I've already talked to X and Y firm. They're not going to make her an offer. But she belongs with you. And if you make her an offer, she'll accept it. She's perfect. And I already spoke to your firm. He told me to make an exception on the grades for me." And so I, at the time, had no idea that this sort of thing went on. She ended up at a really good firm, something that she probably wouldn't normally have gotten into. And what had happened is someone had gone to bat for her on her behalf, with or without her knowledge, I don't know, and gotten her a great job. And somewhere in your midst, there's probably someone who's very powerful, and that person can get you started, as these two people got their boost from powerful and well-networked professors. And so if these students hadn't taken the time to get networked with these professors as they did, these results may never have occurred. These students did a really good job networking with just one person. That was it. And two people, one got into top law school in the United States, another one got into probably the top firm. And I think there was a lot of networking going on in the background. So imagine if in your legal career, you're able to put yourself in the corner of 10, 20, 50, or 100 people that are like that. That's what happens when people become people like the President of the United States. How does a man from a blue-collar family in Arkansas become the President of the United States? How does a Hollywood actor become the President? I once heard something about Bill Clinton that he never forgot a face of anybody that he met. And I'm not sure that this is true, but I do know he used to keep note cards. And I've heard of stories about him walking up to people he'd met for a moment only 20 or 30 years previously and saying hello and asking about their life and their family. All over the United States, there's people whose careers are in the stratosphere, all sorts of people, and many people that you wouldn't think were really great attorneys for many reasons, but they're considered good attorneys by the public because the way they network themselves, and they're more influential. They make more money than most attorneys, and it's because they're networked and they're known to people, and they've been managed to do that with the media and other things. And so in the large firm arena, aside from the media, there's lots of attorneys who are very well networked, both inside and outside their law firms. And they're so well networked that their law firms would likely never want to risk losing them. They're law school classmates that call you every 6 months to see how you're doing. And they're people that you meet that know lots of people all over the country. And they're the sorts of attorneys that have the most business and the most power inside their law firms, and people who really succeed in the practice of law. And they succeed because they have the ability to connect with numerous people. So if you fail to network with associates and partners, you're eventually going to run into problems. And if you fail to network outside of your firm, you're going to have more difficulty getting the job and also having security. So you need to do whatever you can to network. It's important. You need to meet people. You need to leave a positive impression. You need to stay in contact with people. And I think that a lot of times when people fail in the practice of law, it's because they're not networked. And I see regularly, daily, several times a day, 3 times a day probably, or partners, not that many times, but a lot, partners with lots of from major firms that don't have a lot of business. And many times these partners may have risen through the associate ranks based on their hard work and dedication and became partner because they had people in their corner, which was networked, but they also, the firm had enough work to support them. And they may not have risen like that if the firm had not had a lot of business. But this is a very dangerous position to be in because a lot of people make partner in law firms that don't have a lot of business. And if you don't have a lot of business, you're going to be let go if the work that the firm's doing is drying up and going away. And it can't be any other way. A partner needs to be self-sustaining in terms of their work. And if you sit in your office all day and night and just churn out legal work and you don't network with clients and other people in the process, your contribution is going to be limited to that. And if you try to bring in your own work, your contribution is greater and the firm will want to keep you around. When I talk to partners of business, I ask them how they did it, and they always say things like lots of dinners and bottles of wine, or they go through those sorts of statements. And the idea is that if the partner's networking and they're out there, then they're typically bringing in business and work. And the people that do bring in business are the ones that have the best careers. I've seen partners from major law firms have to set up their own shop after they were let go from the firm. And I've seen people even go so far as to open diners in small towns and things after losing their jobs because there's nothing they can do. They're just not networked. And so you just need to understand that your ability to succeed as an attorney is really going to be dependent on networking. And you can't have longevity without it. You can't stay in a firm if you're not well networked. You can't learn about new jobs if you're not well networked. You can't get business if you're not well networked. And you can't protect yourself if you're not well networked. So all these things are unbelievably important for you doing well in the long run. It's one of the most important things that you can ever do for the long-term success in the practice of law. And your ability to network is going to be very important. And I think that one of the greatest tragedies of law school is the networking is hardly emphasized. It's with larger firms, they don't necessarily care. They're going to bring in people that have business. They're going to have certain people that emerge with business. They don't need to train you in these things. There's lots of people with lots of work. So no one's going to tell you you have to do this stuff. And I'm telling you, you have to protect your career. And the only way to succeed really is to go out and form these networks and then use these networks. And I remember once when I was fairly new practicing law that I had a friend at my firm, and he told me, and he made partner fairly quickly, and he told me that you don't have to work all the time. No one's ever going to tell you that. It's not in their best interest. You need to make time for yourself and your own. And if you work all the time, you'll never have time to do the things you want to do for yourself. And I thought that was a good point. And essentially, what he was saying is you can't work all the time. You need to do other things, and your networking can certainly be related to getting business, but that is one of the most important things. So I'm going to take a quick break, and then when I come back, we will take questions, and just any questions you have about today's presentation or anything else that I spoke about today, you can ask, or just anything to do with your career. It's a good time if you're a young attorney to ask questions, or if you're an older attorney to ask questions, and take as much time as you guys have for questions. Thank you. Catherine? Okay, we'll start with questions. I got a shirt change here, so just give me 1 second. Okay, so the first question, and this is my favorite part of the week, is taking questions. Give me 1 second. Any questions you guys have, by the way, are all good questions. Let me just say, so don't be afraid to ask them. A lot of people typically will ask questions about, you can ask about the webinar, or you can certainly ask any questions you have about your career in general. So let me open up real quickly screen again. Just give me 1 second. Okay. First one. Oh, this is nice. Let's see. First question says, this was a wonderful presentation, cutting to the heart of success. What would you recommend as a good first step in networking for a 56-year-old solo practitioner who really has no network? Okay, one thing let me just get this forward. One thing I didn't touch upon today is there's a book, and I think it's called Never Send a Resume. And I really like that book, and I've sent it to people before that have lost jobs and that sort of thing, that have brought up a lot of the same things that you have. Even as a solo practitioner, a lot of times people aren't necessarily building networks. And when you're not building networks, it can definitely be somewhat discouraging when you do try to build a network. What they say in this book is that you're supposed to write down a list, always write down a list of 100 plus people so write down a list of 100 plus people so they could be friends, past acquaintances, just people that you may not be in touch with, family, and others that you may have had some sort of personal or friendly relationship with in the past. And just write all those people down, and it can typically be past work colleagues and all sorts of things. And when you write all that information down, most people can come up with about 100 people that they know. Some people can come up with 200, and with those numbers when you write them down. And then the best thing what you're supposed to do with those people, and this was taught a long time ago in a business generation class for law firms that I actually took. It was an in-depth class, and this is talk about something similar to this and Never Send a Resume. And then this was always given as a way to get business and find jobs and so forth as well. But you write down a list of 100 people that you know. And then once you write down that list, you get in touch with those people. You try to call them and make personal contact with a phone call, or you meet them, or you tell them that you saw something that reminded of them, and you just try to check in. And you don't talk about the fact that you're looking for work. You don't talk about the fact that you're looking for a job. You don't talk about anything. You just basically ask them about themselves and check in and see how they're doing. And then typically at some point they'll ask you about yourself, and then you tell them something along the lines of, like, I'm looking for a position, or I'm doing this, or I'm just trying to get out there and meet people, and I hope you're doing well. And so that's one of the first steps to networking, is you do that. And then once you do that, then people a lot of times will just remember you and refer things to you. And if they know of leads, even if they're not good contacts, they'll often reach out to you, and will often tell you about those leads. And people love providing people with leads. There's some articles that I've also written that aren't based on this, that are on my blog site, which needs to be redone in a serious way, but harrisonbarnes.com, about networking. And there's some articles about that. And that kind of teaches what I'm talking about there. But this is one of the things that I recommend. A lot of times I do Zoom calls all day, and I like Zoom, but I think that there's so much more you get when you meet people in person. So that's one of the things for networking. I think that You need to always write down people from past colleagues, and leads will tell people of leads and so forth. And that's one way to network. Another thing that's important also is learning how to, let me even see if I don't have that, how to be vulnerable. And when you're vulnerable, a lot of times people will relate to you more. So people want to help people that are vulnerable. And one of the problems with attorneys is that most attorneys are afraid to be vulnerable. You're afraid to show weakness with clients. You're afraid to show weakness with people at work. But in your personal life and with friends and acquaintances and so forth, vulnerability goes a long way. And it's something that I personally believe is very important, because when people like you and they can see you as a human, then you become a lot more. So if you tell people what you're trying to do, or what any struggles you're going through, or you connect with them on a personal level, then people typically will like you much more. And that's a good way to network. So networking is not just about being very personal in terms of your or very being seen. It's also about being liked, and people like people that are vulnerable. So this is one of the things that I would recommend in terms of how you network. 56-year-old is, by the way, not old. I know attorneys that are in their mid 80s and still pounding away. You're basically halfway through your career, if that. People will probably live even longer in the future. But that's some of the networking things that I recommend that I think are most important. I think when you write down a list of people, when you call them and make contact with them and make an effort, when you check in with them, then people like that. There was one attorney that I knew and I like, and he actually does this funny thing where he sends this uh, uh, long letter every year, a long letter of about 5 to 10 pages of what he's doing. He talks about, I don't know, anything you can imagine: his diet, his operations, his kids, his divorce. I mean, he'll talk about anything. I get this thing every Christmas, and I love it. And then sometimes he'll include a picture. And I haven't even seen the guy in 20 years, but he sends us to all these different people. And because of that, I always think of him, and I get him job interviews, and I have people talk to him, and I've gotten him business and all this stuff, which is very funny, because all I'm doing is sending this guy a freaking letter. All he's doing is sending me a letter that he's probably sending to hundreds of other people every year. And he's had a very distinguished career. He's done really well. But what's nice about his letters is they show this vulnerability. He talks about himself. He talks about mistakes he's made. I don't even remember. I think then he got divorced and he met his new wife, and he talked about how he knew things. I don't know. He goes into a lot of things. He says a lot of things you normally wouldn't think someone would talk about in a letter, and especially an attorney, and it works. So the point is that when you can be vulnerable and connect with people, and people can see you for who you are, then that can help a lot, and it can really make people want to see you. And one of the things that I've always done is I've had a personal blog and things that I try to write about personal things. And I don't do it from a business standpoint. I do it because I've learned a lot of things myself, and I try to share them with others because I think that they can help, like I'm sharing this with you now. But at the same time, when you can learn to be vulnerable and get in touch with people, that can help. Posting on social networks and things, or connecting with people, or liking posts, and all that in your personal life can carry over also into your professional life. Okay. And thank you for that question, by the way. I thought that was a great question. And if anybody's got any more, I love these questions. Yeah, as a law student, rising 3L, what should I bring to network to get a first year job, given that there are no in-person events to take? Should I be cold emailing partners if firms look interesting? Yes, you should be cold emailing partners. I actually printed letters. I think even though a lot of people send emails and stuff now, I like printed letters. I like voicemail messages sometimes. Those can backfire to some extent. I think that it's always a good idea to speak with the recruiting coordinators inside of law firms about things. Ask them questions. A lot of them are very nice and can help you, even if they can't help you at their firm. You can ask them questions about what they're looking for and so forth. If they can't help you, many times those same people can make recommendations. So they can make recommendations of places they think would be good fits. So that's one of the ways to do things. You can, I think sometimes when you get rejected from a firm after an interview, or even you just get an email from them, you can ask them, do you have any ideas of other places I should apply, of other places? And that's often very useful, because you may have one of the reason that this is a very powerful thing is because you may have a certain type of personality or a certain look or a certain, I don't know, look is the right word, but you may be a certain type of person. And as a certain type of person, you may actually be much better off interviewing with a certain, so conservative. There's firms that are very liberal. There's firms that are that have a lot of authority and are run, like a military ship, and there's ones that aren't. And so different people are comfortable in different types of firms. And so a lot of times when a firm's interviewing you, they just are saying, you're not a good cultural fit. Sorry, we're not going to hire you. But they may know of 5 or 6 firms that are good cultural fits. So I would always recommend when you get rejected, asking people for places that look good. I also do recommend how do you network? By getting involved in groups. You get involved in as many groups as you can. You get involved in groups with your whatever, if you have a religion, with sports, with other attorneys, whoever you possibly can, and then you learn information from them. So all that information you learn from groups is very important. In the role that I'm in as a CEO, there's all sorts of CEO groups. There's tons of them. And every time I get involved in one of these groups, it literally blows my mind, because there's things that people are doing that I'm not aware of. And there's information that other people have about the way things are. So your success and the success of most CEOs is proportional to their network. One of the things that I found very interesting is when you talk to very successful corporate attorneys, like the most successful corporate attorneys, like when they become partners and stuff, they typically have huge Rolodexes. So they can put you in touch with all sorts of things. Like when I say Rolodex, it's huge contacts. They know people that can get anything done. So whatever you need, they can get done. I mean, as long as it's related to the law and business, but if it's finance, whatever. So they have all these contacts, and that's really what these corporate attorneys are doing. They're taking care of their networks. I do think that when you're applying to trying to get a job in a new city, you should be contacting people. You should be asking alumni from your school for information interviews, just getting as much information as you possibly can. People like to help other people and make recommendations. Everyone is taught to that it's important for them to help other people, and people feel good when they help other people. They feel good about it. So it's just something that I would recommend. And again, the problem that a lot of law students and attorneys have is that lack of the vulnerability. And they have issues with vulnerability because if you're vulnerable, when you're vulnerable, that can create problems in terms of you feel like you don't want people to know about your weaknesses and so forth. But vulnerability is actually the key to strength. There's a whole series of books by Brene Brown about vulnerability and why that's a good idea. And I would recommend by her and so forth. And there's just all sorts of exercises that can help you. And this is, again, one of the mistakes that I've certainly made early in my career, was not doing a good job with things. There's certainly online groups you can join. I would love to start networking groups online for attorneys. I wish I could. That's one of the things. I would also networking. You can also I have another site called Top Law Schools, and there's a lot of. I would recommend reviewing that. The reason is because there's just a lot of sharing of information on there about employers and all sorts of things, and you can comment anonymously and ask questions, and so that can be very helpful. Okay, another question. Would starting law school in my 30s be a problem? The answer is no, unless you mind working long hours when you get into your 30s. But I don't think starting law school in your 30s is a problem at all. When it comes to the job seeking, I never ask a good network of them to help. About that may damage relationships, or it's about pride. What is your thought? So I don't think you necessarily ask your network for help, and you don't necessarily, and I agree, when you ask for help, that does sometimes telegraph weakness. You basically need to get in touch with people and just ask them how they're doing. So do not ask for help, people in your network, and then listen. That's it. That's all you need to do. And then when you listen and let them talk about themselves, then they're typically going to ask about you. If you let them talk enough, they will like you a lot and want to help you. I just needed 1 second. I won't do that right now. Yeah, so if you let them talk enough, they're going to like you a lot and want to help you as well. So that's really one of the things that I would recommend. It's just asking them about themselves as much as you possibly can, because then they're going to want to help you and ask about you at some point. When they do ask about you, sometimes the last thing you want to bring up is that you're looking for a job. So when I was in law school, by the way, I tried to get a lot of people involved in looking for positions for me. So I would ask all sorts of people. I would ask girlfriend's mom, my mom, my friend's dad, just all these people. And all those people actually, was able to get interviews through all those people. So these are just people that kind of knew me. So if you do that, that can help you quite a bit as well. Okay, how to build a network as a fresher during pandemic times. The legal market is really grim, and when we're starting from scratch, how to build a strong network, and we're compelled to stay mostly at home. The way to build a network is really to there's still lots of online groups. So in those online groups, there's all sorts of people that you can get in touch with. Get a group, get in touch with. You can stay in touch with law school classmates. You can stay in touch with professors. You can join groups. There's all sorts of things you can do. And these are things that I recommend doing. I recommend that you do whatever you can to try to find and seek out groups. There's ABA groups, there's ABA Young Lawyers, there's all these different things. And what you're doing with all these things is you're looking to make connections and get to know people. And there's lots of groups that can lead to opportunities. So for example, there's one group that I wanted to join at one point. It was called TED. It's like Technology, Entertainment, and Design. And so I applied to work with it, and they said, you can be part of this other TED group for a while until you might become part of the main group. And so I thought that would be a good network. And so then I started meeting people that were part of the main group that would come to this other group. And basically you had to know them before you could get into the main group. So that's just, and so you had to network in the secondary group to get into the main group. And so there's any time you join any group, it always can lead to much better things. This is a good question here. Would you recommend, what would you recommend are the best ways to reactivate your network if you've been away from the legal profession for sometimes several years and want to jump back into a law firm in a senior position? That's a good question. I think that one of the issues that is going to come up if you've been away from the legal profession for a while and you want to jump in is that the people that your network is not necessarily going to trust you anymore because they're not going to be 100% positive that it's not necessarily going to be 100% positive that that your network's going to trust you because they don't know why you were away for several years and why would you want to jump back into a law firm. What I would do is just call people that you may have worked with in the past, set up lunch meetings. If people aren't having lunch, then set up phone calls and talk to them and ask them if they know about any things that you can go to and so forth for that, or anybody you can talk to, and just network with them. And so ask anybody that you worked with in the past. So again, the idea would be to create a list of people that you knew, contact them, ask them how they're doing, wait for them to ask about you, and then when they do, be ready to tell them about it. Be ready to say you're thinking about contact. And that would be probably the best way that I would recommend. That looks like pretty much all the questions, unless anybody has anything else. I appreciate all these networking questions. I think these were really good questions, and I enjoyed today's presentation. If anybody has any more questions, I don't think they do, then we can, thank you for being on the call today. Let me just see, there may be one other thing here. Okay, great. And thank you very much, everyone. And I will talk to you next week, and thank you for participating today. Okay. And by the way, next week, I'm going to try to put out some ideas. I'm thinking about this whole idea of network. And I understand the top law schools, you can do it on there, but it would be nice. There's one of the things I would say just for everyone's benefit is in the executive community, like there's all these groups, there's Vistage and there's YPO, and there's all these groups where executives get together and they share questions and different sorts of things with each other. And let me even see if I can share an example of that for you guys while we're on the call, is how it operates. Because I was on one just quite recently, actually. With 1 second, just give me 1 second here. I'm going to try to share it with you guys just to show you what it looks like. Circles there. Let me see here. Workbook. So this is, let me just see here. I'm going to download this. That is PDF, and I'll just show you guys an example. Let me just share my screen real quickly. This is just an example from a thing I was doing at Berkeley not too long ago, and they have these peer circles are very common in different groups, but in peer circles, they do this at Vistage, and it would be nice to do something like this for attorneys, is what I'm saying, where groups of people can get together, where people will share information about themselves, and then they will discuss various issues. For example, significant events, best days of my life when I hit bottom. And these are just ways for them to get to know each other. And then people will get together once a month, and they'll have these meetings. And some days, sometimes they may have a speaker. And then after the speaker, like I'm speaking today, and then after the speaker, they will get together and they will discuss the speaker, and they'll discuss their careers and how things are going and so forth. And these are very useful. And it's a shame that attorneys, honestly, that they don't do this kind of stuff, because they do this a lot for executives and CEOs and things, and it's a chance to be vulnerable. And there was one other thing I did want to share with you guys about vulnerability. If you give me 1 second, I'm just stopping the share for 1 second, and I'll try to find that. Give me 1 second here. And I'll put the link to it if I can find it. But I thought that was just very interesting. And I'd really like it if there was a way for attorneys and law students and stuff to do that. So this is from the Huffington Post, and let me just put this. It's called "Vulnerability is Power," and I'm going to put that in the chat to everyone, because it's a good. Let me just share my screen again. This is just a good thing that goes along with what I was talking about being vulnerable right here. So this is the article, and it's by Bill George, Harvard Business School, and let me put this in the chat for everyone. And that could be really helpful for you guys to review that, just in terms of why. Kind of reasons to be vulnerable. And when you're vulnerable, you're actually showing your strength. So a lot of times people are trying to protect their ego at all costs. And when you're doing that, you're actually separating yourself from people, and the people can't help you as much and so forth. That to me is powerful. I really enjoyed that article. And then for introverts, there's one other question that says, are there any networking tips for introverts? And there's actually a really good book out called The Power of Introverts. And let me just see. And I don't know. Let me just see here now. It's called The Power of Introverts, since this is the question. And I would recommend reviewing that book. So a lot of people are introverted, and most very smart people tend to be introverted. So I think that being introverted is actually a very good characteristic. I personally, even though I'm doing these webinars and stuff, I'm actually much more comfortable, when I like working alone and not without a lot of people, and because I like to concentrate, and ideas give me a lot of comfort and interest, whereas a lot of people need people around for them, to interact with, for them to be comfortable and secure. So being an introvert is a good thing. And a lot of the best attorneys and a lot of the best rainmakers are actually introverts. It just depends on how you do it. So I would read I think it's called The Power of Introverts or something, which is a great book that I hope helps you as well. Okay, thank you, everyone. And I really appreciate everyone being here today. And I hope the session was helpful. And I look forward to talking next week, and hopefully can make some progress on this idea of setting up these kind of groups for everyone. Thank you.